Is doing the hard thing always the right thing? I mean, you immediately want to say no, because we know that that's not always the case, yet we are always glorifying the people that take the road less traveled. And we look down on the people that take the path of least resistance. I want to talk about this today because I have shared 2 quotes recently that have glorified that path. One from Marcus Arelius, and he said, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." And then there's the quote from Ryan Holiday, and Ryan Holiday is a huge Marcus Aurelius fan, so he probably got it from him. It's the title of his book, "The Obstacle is the Way." And both of those exemplify the idea that taking the path less traveled, the path with obstacles, is the best way. And I shared both of those quotes in the past couple of videos because those quotes resonate deeply with me and they feel very true. But I want to take a couple steps back. And so one of the first things that we need to talk about is, why is the road less traveled? I mean, there are a million reasons why people don't take the road less traveled, and knowing those reasons is very important because, there's a reason why no one makes running shoes out of cardboard or kisses rattlesnakes or makes a house out of pine cones. Just because it's not done frequently, or just because it's difficult, does not mean that it is better. And doing the hard thing makes you somehow stronger. That's just not the case. And so just because something is hard to do or has lots of resistance does not mean that it is better, and it doesn't mean that it makes you a better person by doing it. I think ultimately, when we glorify the path less traveled, it's generally because it requires sacrifice. And there's a good reason why we put sacrifice on such a pedestal, because it's one of the most noble virtues. Your ability to sacrifice momentary, quick pleasure for something in the long run is a key indicator of living a good, happy, successful life. There are studies that prove this. I think everyone's seen that study with the kid and the marshmallow, where they put a marshmallow in front of the kid and say, "Hey, I'm going to leave the room, but if you don't eat the marshmallow and I come back and it's still here, I'll reward you with more marshmallows." And so they leave the room, and there's a camera on in the room, and it's always so funny to watch the kids squirm. And some of the kids eat the marshmallow and some don't, and when the person comes back, they give them another marshmallow and reward them. And that's cute and everything, but what often gets skipped over is that they followed these kids after the study, and it was the kids that ate the marshmallow struggled in life, and those that didn't were better off in school. They were better off in social situations. They had better social lives, and they just had an overall better physical health too. What I'm trying to say is this study shows that being able to sacrifice in the moment for instant gratification for something in the long term is incredibly important. And so I think that's why we glorify sacrifice, and for good reason. But there's a shadow side to sacrifice, and that's what I want to talk about today. There was another study that was somewhat similar. It was done in the 1950s by a person named Leon Festinger. And in that study, it showed that when you can get people to sacrifice in a group setting, that group cohesion amplifies dramatically. And everyone wants that for their community. Everyone wants that for their group. A strong group identity, a strong sense of community, because that's what creates good communities and good groups. But the problem is, and the thing that we need to be aware of, is that often, that the sacrifice side of things is often what can lead us to be manipulated. High demand groups this study that showed this talked about how high demand groups like military groups or elite academic programs or elite sports teams, they often require a lot of sacrifice to create this strong sense of identity among the team or among the group. And we also see this in the corporate world, where the people who sacrifice most for the company are the ones that are rewarded and praised most in the company. And to point out the elephant in the room, we also see this among religious groups. especially the high demand religious groups where sacrifice is required for membership. Groups with cult-like tendencies will often use sacrifice to generate this sense of cohesion, but it also serves as a barrier to external criticism or internal failings, thanks to the confirmation bias that sacrifice produces. And cult leaders implicitly or even explicitly know this, and they will use this to their advantage because, like I said, every group wants this cohesion, this identity, this sense of community, and that's all good as long as we understand that we could also be manipulated with the sacrifices that we are making. And once we can see that, once we see the way that sacrifice is used, we'll see it everywhere. Like I said, you'll start to see it at your job. You can see it among families. You can see it among pretty much any group of people will have sacrifices tied to the group. I just finished my run, and I realized that I failed to mention an interesting part to this study. I recently finished the book A Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. And in that book, he cited that same study, and he pulled out the finding that the more irrational the sacrifice is, the more strong the outcome is from that sacrifice. So if you're irrationally sacrificing something, like it doesn't really make sense why you're sacrificing it, the stronger the group cohesion, the stronger the confirmation bias is in response to that sacrifice. Anyways, back to the run. And now I can almost hear the ex-Mormons and ex-Christians just cheering because they see this as proof that, these religious groups are only using sacrifice to create a sense of confirmation bias that acts as a barrier to criticism and to keep people in. And while that's technically, subjectively a case that you could make, I want us to take all of this information and look inward. So I want you, ex-Mormons, ex-Christians, ex-Jehovah's Witness, anything, if you've left a high demand group, I want us to look inward and think about the sacrifices that we had to make to leave that group and understand that same concept of sacrifice applies to what we're doing. So as the pendulum swings, the confirmation bias will be just as strong given the sacrifice that we have to make to leave these groups. So just be aware that the confirmation bias and the effects that sacrifice has goes both ways. And so in summary here, what I'm trying to say is there are three things that we need to remember when we think about sacrifice or when we notice sacrifice. So first thing, sacrifice is a noble virtue. Without sacrifice, our communities would completely fall apart, our relationships would be non-existent, and our children wouldn't even survive. Like, sacrifice is incredibly important for these relationships. Second, sacrifice makes you vulnerable to manipulation. And so just understanding that when you're asked to make a sacrifice, big or small, the person or organization or whatever that asks you to make that sacrifice could have ulterior motives. And just understanding that, just remembering that, or just noticing that serves as somewhat of an antidote to that issue. And last but not least, third, we tend to glorify sacrifice and demonize selfishness. And I think there's a happy medium here. We do not need to martyr ourselves for our children, for our communities, or for a cause that we believe in. We do not need to martyr ourselves and give everything that we have. There's a happy medium here. And I don't think we should demonize selfishness, nor do I think we should glorify sacrifice. Moderation, I think, is the key here. So overall, sacrificing is a noble virtue. But we need to be careful and aware of what we're sacrificing to or for, and we need to do so in moderation. And so while I still resonate very deeply with the quote from Marcus Arelius and from Ryan Holiday about the obstacle being the way, and that the impediment to action propels action. That resonates, it still resonates deeply. All that to say, I will be approaching what stands in the way. I will be approaching the obstacles that stand in my way with a little bit more awareness. Anyways, I hope that was interesting. If it was, stick around and I'll catch you in the next video.